Welcome to The Other Side, Mississippi Today's political podcast. The Other Side lets you hear directly from the most connected players and observers across the spectrum of politics in Mississippi. From breaking news to political strategy to interviews with candidates and elected officials, we'll bring you facts, perspectives, and context that helps you cut through the noise and understand all sides of the story. Welcome to The Other Side, Mississippi Today's political podcast. I'm your host, Adam Ganucheau. Joining me today in the studio are three of my esteemed colleagues. To my left, Geoff Pender. Hey, Geoff, how's it going?
Hey, Adam.
Across from me at the table is Bobby Harrison. Bobby.
Hey, guys.
And to my right, across the table from me there is Taylor Vance. Hey, Taylor.
Hey, everyone.
Well, you know, we have been spending a lot of time and energy this year, and I mean, every one of us could say for genuinely multiple years on Medicaid expansion. Medicaid expansion, of course, was the big issue going into this legislative session. As we sit here today, as you are listening to this episode right now, the 2024 legislative session is officially over, and it ends without Medicaid expansion.
Real quick point of clarification. They may come back in for 1 day on what that.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I guess it's not officially over. The 14th could be the last day. Yeah. Lawmakers are not in Jackson today. I can promise you that.
They're going home for a while.
Yeah,
that's right.
Thank goodness. The city's safe.
That's
Put
right.
your lawn furniture back out.
We can
let your pets out.
We can get into our favorite restaurants again without them having slammed all the reservations. And you know, it's this time of year is always an interesting one for us journalists because we get to break down sort of what happened, what didn't. And as I said, Medicaid expansion, the big issue, did not. It died a pretty, I guess, sort of unseemly death at the end of the session.
It really kind of died in the most Mississippi legislature way possible.
It malingered.
That's right. That's right. Well, it's dead. Thank you all for joining us today. I guess we'll see you next week. No, I'm just kidding. You know, it's there's gonna be a lot of breaking this down to do. We'll spend a good bit of time today in this episode doing that. We will be spending probably years breaking down what happened this legislative session. But you know, for the first real session in which lawmakers seriously considered, debated, and really sort of worked on this issue, it got pretty far. It really was close there at the end, and the end is, I think, where I want to start for this episode, and I'm sure we'll talk about some other stuff. Geoff, you have a long sort of takeout kind of explainer analysis TikTok. I don't even know what you want to call it. Opus, I think we've been jokingly calling it. That published on Saturday that sort of starts at the beginning of the session.
Yeah.
You joked earlier in the week it's going to start in 1817 and kind of go all the way through the present day. But it starts kind of at the beginning of the session or going into this session, sort of focused on this issue, and you really do a great job of explaining sort of every step of the process, how it developed, and ultimately how it died. Well, let's start with just the last week, because this past week, I mean, that's where really the drama ramped up in a pretty incredible way. There was just I said multiple times I felt whiplash just because of the back and forth that you know it seemed dead 5 or 6 times and then it was revived, and you know walk us through that last week though, because it was a big one.
We had a couple of Hail Mary plans, so I guess we went into the short rows of that whole debate. Honestly, with the House and Senate still pretty far apart.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we went for much of the session into the kind of near the last with the Senate had a couple of demands. One, that it, you know, only go up to 100% of federal poverty level, that it only cover kind of the poorest of the poor people and leave the rest on private insurance or the exchange. That in and of itself would guarantee, per the ACA, that the state would not receive the billions of dollars that most other states look at as the impetus of why you would expand Medicaid. So they were stuck on that for a while. The Senate also, one of its demands was that there be this stringent work requirement where I guess you create a bureaucracy to check everybody 4 times a year and make sure not only that they're working, but they're working X many hours. Uh, that, at least the real politic right now, is not going to be approved by the feds. Other states have seen that. They canceled work requirements that were in effect. So uh, essentially, the Senate, for the longest time up till near the end, had 2 demands that just kind of made it unworkable. But here at the last week, we saw some compromise going on. The House first offered a plan, hybrid, kind of would mirror a little bit of Arkansas's, where people would stay on an exchange from 100% of poverty to 138. We saw the Senate accept that.
So the Senate moved off of that first sort of
Yeah,
demand.
they agreed to take the billions of dollars of federal money to cover this. That was big, but throughout all of this, up until last night, when there might still be some hope, the Senate stood firm on the work requirement. The House this week, I guess you would say, kind of caved in on that. Said, okay, work requirement. The proposal went back and forth. That had a domino effect of House Democrats who, this is a big vote. You need a high margin. So they were important even with a majority.
Democrats had rare voting
right,
power.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, they said, look, no, we've told you all along the work requirement is going to delay this or kill it, or, may never go into effect if you have that. We told you we're opposed to that. We're not going to vote for it. That caused great consternation. And, there's people are going to be blaming each other on this for years to come. But of course, some Republicans were blaming the House Democrats for, I guess, standing firm
Right.
on
what they wanted. And
right.
a workable plan is really, I think, what they wanted all along.
And, the Senate, this whole last week, maybe Bobby can speak to this. He first posed it to me, and I think he's been right. We're not really sure throughout at least all this last how many votes the Senate had to do anything.
Look, first of all, I want to give Jason White, the Speaker of the House, and Lieutenant Governor Deborah Hostman both credit for bringing this issue up, which was a controversial issue in some quarters of the Republican Party, especially with the leader of the Republican Party in the state, Governor Tate Reeves. But they brought it up, and they made an honest effort to try to pass some form of Medicaid expansion. And this is where I kind of probably make them mad. But, I mean, I think they just didn't. At the end, they just stopped. I mean,
talking.
They didn't
stopped
communicate.
talking, and I mean, there were still avenues that could be pursued during the final hours on the final day of the deadline, and they just, Jason White said a couple of things. He said that he recommitted the compromise plan, A, because of the House Democrats, and B, because there wasn't enough votes in the Senate to pass it, and the Senate didn't. The Senate leadership didn't say he was wrong about that, but it was almost as if there was some type of fear. I mean, I've seen time and time on big issues in this Capitol before where the issues were voted down early at one point in the session. They came back. If that had been voted down, that still would have been an opportunity to recommit it, to do further work, to try to pass something. But, there at the end, Robert Johnson, the House Democratic leader, offered a compromise that really left the Senate position pretty much intact, and they would not even bring that proposal forward, even though the Senate Republicans said they liked it. The Senate leadership said they liked it, but they wouldn't even bring it forward for a vote. And, Jason White said, well, do you think the Senate Republicans would have passed a proposal by Robert Johnson? Maybe because it pretty much checked all the boxes for them, but we'll never know, because they were such a fear of failure that they wouldn't step out there and try to to see what they could pass.
Yeah, there was so much focus in those final days on the House, and you know, I kind of want to pose the question a little bit more directly. I mean, who really is to blame? But I mean, it really seemed to me, and I think y'all would all agree, and everybody who is everybody in the Capitol was a buzz all week about this. But I don't think the Senate ever had the votes to pass even their latest compromise proposal. I mean, and that's what people were arguing. Jason White was arguing that at the end too. I mean, you know,
I mean, I think it's hard to say for sure. I mean, the speaker said on the record that he thought they only had 28
He
votes.
said that's what the leadership told
That's
him.
what the leadership told him, which is shy of the 3/5 majority. I mean, but the lieutenant governor also told us on the record that they did have the votes. Now, he didn't spit a number out, but didn't he say that the Senate had the votes?
Well, Adam, you know, I was going back and thinking, you know, midday on the deadline day, Governor Hostman did an impromptu press availability that you were there, and I came in a little later, and I was going back and looking at the quote you put in the story, and he said, "We had the votes for the original Senate plan." I thought at the time he was talking about the compromise that was worked out.
he meant that original.
He meant the
plan.
original was Geoff. I mean, maybe that Geoff referenced that where they only went up to
Right.
100% of the
It wasn't real expansion.
It was,
Just wasn't
it was
expansion.
I think the Senate Medicaid chair called it Medicaid Light or something other.
Expansion light.
Light. But I mean, I think maybe he was talking, you know, and Blackwell told us early on that, you know, he didn't think he had the votes for the
compromise he offered.
But he, in fairness to him, in offering that compromise, he said I don't know if we had the votes. For
right.
I think at the end of the day, you know, as we think back and look back on this, that final compromise plan that both sides had agreed to, again, maybe the Senate never had the votes. Blackwell was pretty transparent that he didn't know, like you just said, Bobby, he didn't know if they had the votes on that final compromise plan or not. But I think even on that final day where it eventually died after the House Democratic leader proposed his sort of compromise, the House votes were there. I really believe that. I think they could have gotten there had one or two of those little tweaks been met that the Democrats had proposed.
Yeah, well, Jason White told us, Taylor, that even without those Democratic votes, he had the
He had
He
the
had them.
3/5.
House Medicaid Chairwoman Missy McGee said the same thing. It seemed like leadership was in lockstep that they had the votes for that.
Now, they would not have the 2/3 vote to override the governor's veto.
That's right.
expected veto, but
And-
that'd be another issue to fight another day.
Right. And I know, I mean, we're talking about strictly the legislative process, but I think if you want to look at it at blame, I mean, I think a lot, people aren't really mentioning Governor Reeves a whole lot. I mean, he's the one that really made this pretty difficult by being so opposed to it. I mean, for years.
And in this session, you know,
in this
Taylor,
se-
you reported, we all, you know, knew this too. You know, he was pulling Republican senators in almost one by one for all session long.
For late nights at the mansion and sending them text messages and lobbying them.
Capitol.
Yeah. So I don't think that there's really one group of people that's just solely responsible for why things got sideways at the end. There's enough blame to go around. In fact, I think if people would have spent more time communicating and trying to find another compromise instead of trying to blame people, we might be having a different conversation today.
There's a lot of focus on the end, but I think maybe the die was somewhat cast on the front end.
Right.
This got off to a pretty clunky start. The House, you know, held public hearings, showed their hand early, came up with a bill early, you know, was ready to go. And we spent, you know, 2.5 months with the Senate saying, we're going to have a plan. We're going to have a plan. And just wait or whatever.
And we waited.
Yeah. You know, this is a huge issue. It could have benefited from some more time. I'm sure it could have benefited from some more homework, legwork, whatever you call it, before the session even started to, you know, try to at least get maybe in the same ballpark.
And throughout the session, I mean, and I'm not going to name any names, but throughout the session, there were numbers being bandied around that just about the how Medicaid expansion would be a negative thing in some ways. The numbers that they just did not coincide with what experts who get study this and economists, all sorts of experts. Those numbers that were being bandied around the legislature by some quarters, just
Yeah.
They were wrong. They were false. They were just wrong.
yeah, and they never, we tried to point out the numbers that the experts were saying, and these experts were not, some flaming liberals. You had the study by the state economists who, is not
Nonpartisan.
Nonpartisan.
and then you had, the not Kaiser anymore. What is it? It's KFS.
KFF,
Yeah.
And other groups, and then you see, this has happened in 40 other states. Throughout the session, I heard time and time again, if we expand Medicaid, it's gonna wreck the private insurance exchange that is set up ironically through the Affordable Care Act, just like Medicaid expansion is. But 40 states have expanded Medicaid, and you know what? All 40 of those states still have a strong exchange.
Right.
You know what else those states have that Mississippi doesn't have? A much lower rate of uninsured people
Exactly.
than Mississippi has. Much lower rate.
Well, that's right. We got 40 states. 20 of them are Republican. You can look to. You don't have to rely on ivory tower studies.
or
call up.
Yeah.
Call up somebody in another state, and that's another thing too. I gotta say, at least on the Senate side, you've got 40 states. 20 of them are Republican. Different variations of expansion to look at. And it looks like at the outset, they looked around and said, we don't see anything in those 40 states we like. But look over here in Georgia, that their plan is so whatever that it's not even considered expansion. Let's model ours after that.
How many were they? Georgia probably has what?
About 3,000.
4,000.
But first of all, Georgia has like 3 times or 4 times the population of Mississippi.
right.
And they're covering, what did y'all say, 3,000?
About 3,000, 3,500
They've spent
people.
most of the money to date trying to figure out some sort of work requirement monitoring system. They spent millions on that and almost nothing on actual health care. And they've been tangled up in court with the federal government because of that. So, yeah, it's almost like, let's see, what's the most miserable example we can find of, a failed attempt at expansion? Okay, well, let's model it after that.
Yeah. I think going back just a minute, Geoff, your point about the early days of session, a lot of people, I think right now, especially out of state who haven't necessarily been following this closely, may want to say it's really surprising that Mississippi lawmakers got as far as they did on expansion.
Yeah.
Going into this session, I think everybody, certainly we talked about it. You can go back and listen to those, December and January podcasts. I mean, Jason White, the incoming and now I guess new first year, just finished his first session speaker, was talking about it last fall. He said straight up, we are going to have a real conversation and debate about this. Anybody who is listening and paying attention to Mississippi politics going into this session would have told you that you've got leaders in both the House and the Senate and Delbert Hosemann who have expressed an openness at some level to expansion. So, those early days of this session I thought were so frustrating, especially coming from the Senate side, from Hosemann and the Senate leadership, because they appeared flat-footed. The House sent them a plan, the last day of February, I think is what it was. February 28th, that was real expansion. It was full expansion. It had a work requirement that would have allowed expansion to go into effect even if the feds didn't approve it. They sent that to the Senate that last day of February, and I think the Senate didn't actually unveil any plan until like the last day of
March 28th.
Yeah, the last day of March, which effectively leaves 1 month, a little bit more than 1 month exactly to kind of work from there. We talked about this on the podcast along the way over these past few weeks. Where was the Senate? And they were caught flat-footed, it seemed, which was really surprising given everybody knew this was going to be an issue. Delbert Hosemann in particular. I mean, we wrote a lot about this. We've talked about it, but this is the guy in the Republican Party who has taken the most heat for his position on expansion, and he was just underground for months in the first 3/4 of this session, and then he and his Republican colleagues in the Senate finally release a plan with 1 month left to go, and
That's not
it
really
wasn't
expansion.
and he said all along, I've got to go with what my Republican caucus in the Senate wants, but he just, I mean, for lack of a better term, he let a lot of people down. I think even a lot of Republicans who have long wanted expansion to be sort of front and center in the legislative process.
Well, in fairness to him, he did have a tough job. I mean, the Senate, there was a significant number of Senate Republicans who were just not going to vote for Medicaid expansion. I mean, heck, their plan that y'all talking about and it was not really a good plan. I mean, they barely. I mean, it didn't pass by a wide margin.
Yeah.
Right.
But and I mean, what y'all say about the early in the session, I mean, that's important. But I want to go back to the end of the session. Some things just kind of struck me as weird that final week. Like when the House and Senate negotiators came up finally on a deadline at 8:00, came up on Monday night, came up with their compromise plan. I mean, it was just bizarre how it happened. It was filed. I mean, usually with big issues like that, the people involved are going to come out and talk to the media and say, what they did and try to sell that plan that they got to work to pass over the coming days. But what did they do? They all went under. We couldn't find anybody.
They were hiding from us. And when we did find them, they ran from us.
One of them sprinted from the media at one point. I
Right.
I mean, which was just bizarre. I'd never seen that before. When big issues, when the big issues passed in the, when they did the 1 cent sales tax increase, which trust me, that was to increase, which is a big tax increase. When you do that in a tough environment, they didn't run and hide. They stood there and answered questions and said why we needed to do this, and they were able to get it through the process.
Well,
but they just went went underground.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think has been really one of the most frustrating things for us this session is just sort of the lack of information that's been available. And I don't think the legislators have really thought about that. And then when there's a lack of information, the public doesn't know what the heck's going on. I mean, it's just crazy because, I mean, after that conference report was adopted, like you said, House Medicaid Chair Missy McGee didn't want to talk. Senate Medicaid Chair Kevin Blackwell didn't want to talk. In fact, he just nodded at us and walked off. The lieutenant governor couldn't really be seen for months. I mean, other than when he was presiding, he wouldn't come out and talk. And that has not been the way that he's conducted business the past 2 years that I've covered him. When they recommitted the conference report, I mean, the speaker's taxpayer-funded communications director whisked him away into his office and just said, no, we're not answering any questions for y'all. And I mean, and no one knew what the hell was going on. Yeah, is that normal?
No, it's not. It was bizarre. I mean, yeah. Have you ever seen that, Geoff?
Yeah, I've seen a slow creep towards it, but no. I mean, and I don't know on a big issue like this. I can't ever fathom how they think that serves them
anything,
or anyone or anything.
Yeah. Robert Johnson, the House Democratic leader, got so fed up with this exact thing that he just walked onto the damn Senate floor himself on the deadline day and walked right up to Kevin Blackwell, the Republican Medicaid Senate chair, and just said, here's our idea. I think you got 30 Democratic votes on our side if you can get it through. And he walked right out and talked to the press about it. I mean, he was just like, screw these backroom meetings and me struggling to get.
And look,
get on the
had
books.
that proposal been done 2-3 weeks before,
Bobby,
that might have flown.
Perfect segue into Bobby. What you wrote this past weekend. About the conference committee. I mean, you got 3 Senate leaders appointed by Delbert Hosemann, 3 House leaders appointed by Jason White, who were tasked with in the final 2 or 3 weeks of trying to find an agreement among each other. They were underground for the most part. They had one public meeting and then didn't do another one. We can get into all that. You can read Jeff's story to get into all that. But Bobby, you wrote over the weekend that another thing that was kind of out of the ordinary here on big major issues like this is that the majority party leaders, Delbert Hosemann and Jason White, appointed 3 Republicans each to those committees rather than, including a Democrat, even though Democrats have been the only ones trying to pass expansion in the last 10 years.
And they needed the Democrats' vote on
Right.
that particular
Yeah,
issue.
yeah,
They
it
needed
wasn't
a big
yeah.
time. And look, if you had one Democrat on the House Conference Committee side and one on the Senate side, they could not have, they did not have any power to actually change things. They couldn't say, nope, we can't have a work requirement because I'm here. But what they could have done is say, look, this is not going to fly with my caucus, because there was just no communication going on there. And they could have talked to the other conferees about what their members would vote for and what their members wouldn't vote for. What Robert Johnson offered at the end is kind of it's kind of complicated to go into, but it was very simple change. That he wasn't saying do away with a work requirement, which he would he would rather do, but he was saying, look, you're not going to do away with a work requirement. Can you do this little thing? And Kevin Blackwell, the Senate Medicaid chair, said, well, that's not too big a ask, and so did Delbert Hosemann.
But it was too late.
It was too late.
It was on the
too
last.
late.
That's
And
what I mean. 2
and
weeks ago.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if they had been, if Robert Johnson or somebody, a Democrat, had been on that conference committee just to communicate with the other conferees, that could have been worked out maybe in time enough to get that passed. But but then we go back to whether anything was going to actually pass the Senate. They could have tried. I mean, that was another point I made is that they just didn't try. If you take a vote and lose, you can try something else.
Yeah. A lot of people may be asking themselves, all right, what we were talking about earlier, there was this back and forth. There were these like Hail Mary attempts, but if we, and I believe this to be true, if at the end of the day the House could have had their votes for something and the Senate couldn't, why couldn't the Senate get there? Geoff, earlier in the session, gets back to Tate Reeves a little bit. You wrote this column that has become everyday sort of lingo for lexicon for everybody in the Capitol. FOT, fear of Tate. You wrote about sort of how on these major issues you need political cover. This is a hugely politically charged issue for so many, especially Republicans who represent more rural conservative districts. There wasn't as much political cover on this issue because Tate Reeves had really kind of taken control of 2 major lobbies that really I think could have helped provide some of that cover in business leaders and hospital leaders in particular. If we're assigning blame, I think you can't have a conversation about who's really to blame for this without talking about especially hospital leaders. I mean, hospital leaders were totally beholden to Tate Reeves, and I don't know that there are bad reasons for that. Tate has shown himself as a governor who, even in the last 2 or 3 years, has line item vetoed bond money, appropriations for specifically that are supposed to go to some of those bigger hospitals. Those hospital leaders really did not want to be on the wrong side of this with Tate Reeves for
A lot of money
some
at
good
stake.
reason. Millions
Yeah.
of dollars for their institutions at stake.
Yeah, and the ironic thing here is the way that Tate Reeves got the big hospital leaders to back down, sit on their hands, stay silent on expansion. The way he got them to do that is by expanding Medicaid. He expanded Medicaid for hospitals, just not for sick people. Same pot of money. He took advantage of expanded payments to the hospitals. Enough to cover, some of their uncompensated care or whatever, and
And taxed them.
and implemented a tax on them. That's kind of ironic too, I guess. But anyway, and that, from what I understand, and there was some frustration among Republicans in the legislature pushing for expansion. They felt like the hospital leaders were being timid because they were too afraid that would get taken away from them. So,
And Tate Reeves would do that, by the way. He's proven himself to have
know.
done that. I mean,
there's some question to whether he easily could. But
well, if
but
he
there's
could,
a
he would for
potentially
sure.
could.
For
I
sure.
think that waiver has to be re-upped at some point, reapplied for. So I guess there is a potential there.
Well, before we go, I mean, this is kind of a we're getting sort of deep into sort of the death of this bill and sort of what happened over these last few days of the session and what led to it. But for anybody listening who wants to kind of think about what's next for Medicaid expansion in Mississippi, I'll pose that question to y'all. What are your takeaways just about like how far we really did get this session and what could we expect in the next, legislative session or between now and then?
Well, I was struck when the speaker was walking off the floor the day that Medicaid expansion died for all practical purposes, because he's Taylor, I think you heard him too. He didn't commit to he was sort of the person who led this charge to try to pass Medicaid expansion. You could argue, but he didn't commit to taking it up. He said we'll reassess and see whether we want to do it. Try again next year or the year after. But he said my Republican caucus, they have other issues they want to tackle. So he said we'll look at it, but he didn't. He didn't say we got so close we're going to try again next year. He kind of left that in limbo.
Yeah, didn't the lieutenant governor say that he wants to look at it next year?
Yeah, he did. Lieutenant Governor Hoseman was kind of defiant when he came out and talked to the press there at the end. He said, look, I'm the person who's been campaigning on this and talking about it. I'm the person that got the most votes in the state in the past general election. So, and I ran on this issue, and he kind of ran on it, but he was kind of,
he couched it.
Yeah.
All cycle. I mean,
So I guess I would say, I asked that to say, I can't read Speaker White's mind, but I think probably what he's thinking and what the position that he may take is, the House has proven we have the votes to pass expansion. We're willing to do it. Let's see what the Senate sends us next session.
Maybe so.
And I think you're probably going to see some advocacy groups, still try and do raise awareness and advocate for this in the off season. What that looks like, I don't really know, but I don't think that this is completely dead, and there will be something next year.
I've thought about that too, but a lot of people saying, "Oh, it's dead, not going to be brought back up." I don't think that's the case. I think it would just be a matter of time, because this issue is not. Shouldn't be political. I mean, it's a grassroots issue. We're a poor state. We have a lot of uninsured people. We have a lot of sick people. We have a lot of people working 2 jobs that are one appendectomy away from ruin.
Hospitals are on the verge.
Rural hospitals are going to continue to struggle and close. So I mean, it's deal with it now or deal with it later. And unless some other option, Trump gets elected and comes up with Trump care that's better, unless that happens, which I don't think it will, what, as Speaker White said, this is what's out there.
The ACA is what we have.
This is what we have. So,
and I predict that by the time the 2025 legislative session rolls around, 40 states right now have expanded Medicaid. I bet by that time,
it'll be higher than that.
It'll
40.
be higher than 40, and we're going to be continually just sort of on the outside looking in.
And I mean, thinking Trump is going to do away with it, I don't think, or anyone at this point is not realistic.
Donald Trump says a lot of things. If you go back and remember, one thing he said when he was talking about repealing, he never offered a specific plan, but when he was talking about repealing the Obamacare, if you will, he said, I'm going to offer something better and cover more people. Well, how are you going to cover those people? It's going to be some form of, they may call it something else, but it's going to be Medicaid. If they do cover more people, that's it's going to be some form of Medicaid. They can call it, Trump care or something other, but it'd be the same principle as Medicaid.
Yeah. Taylor, you just mentioned this. I mean, the advocacy groups, Mississippi has always had, pretty active advocacy. They're left leaning for the most part. They champion, causes that typically the conservative establishment majority won't take up in Mississippi.
Sure.
I don't know. I mean, I haven't really seen a session in which one issue was rallied around by all of those groups. There are a lot of different groups, even surprising ones that have some influence, have some money to spend, coming together on this. There are already talks, even we're 48 hours after it officially died. There have been talks already of how can we take the energy that we sort of ginned up during this legislative session, corral that and expand it over the next few months going into 2025. You can say this definitively. There's never been more focus on this issue in Mississippi than right now. I mean, that's one outcome of this debate and the advocacy around it. And, that's gonna be a factor. It just will. I don't know if Republican lawmakers are gonna take that and say, we have to do this. We have a mandate, but there will be focus and energy and attention on this for many, many, many years to come.
Yeah.
So
I think they should try to go into the churches.
Oh yeah,
I mean, even conservative leaning churches. I think when people think about it and hear all the facts, even in those churches, they're going to say, "Well, why aren't we doing this?"
Yeah, that's right. Clergy, by the way, did of all those groups and sort of the advocates, clergy was very much at the forefront of sort of the push for expansion, and that did include a lot of conservative pastors,
These weren't just those liberal Episcopalians. These were Southern Baptists, Methodists as well.
That's right. So, yeah, we'll see what happens. But to the three of y'all, we had several other colleagues who were in the building helping us cover this over the past few months. Thank you for your just commitment to sort of providing, we can talk about it in many ways, providing facts that are verified and trusted and proven via real experts from in the state and around the country, to telling the full story, both sides of it. The people who supported expansion, the people who opposed it. I'll say this: that last week, I've never seen this. At least since I've been at Mississippi Today, I was a founding reporter in 2016. But the way that people relied on us for information, y'all for information, those last few days was a sight to behold for me. It was very proud to see that the work y'all were doing was being held up in that way, and just thank you for your coverage. I can speak for a lot of people when I say that. So thank y'all for the coverage of the session overall, but this issue in particular, and thanks for being here today to help us understand it a little better. And I know we've got more analysis and insights coming even in the short term this week. So, thank you all so much.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, you.
Guys.
As we cover the biggest political stories in the state, you don't want to miss an episode of The Other Side. We'll bring you more reporting from every corner of the state, sharing the voices of Mississippians and how they are impacted by the news. So what do we need from you, the listener? We need your feedback and support. If you listen to the podcast on a player like iTunes or Stitcher, please subscribe to the show and leave us a review. We also have an email in which you can share your feedback. That address is podcast@MississippiToday.org. Y'all can also reach out to me or any of my colleagues through social media or email. And as always, thank you for your feedback and support. Subscribe to our weekly podcast on your favorite podcast app or stream episodes online at MississippiToday.org/theotherside. For the Mississippi Today team, I'm Adam Ganucheau. The Other Side is produced by Mississippi Today and engineered by Blue Sky Studios. We hope you'll join us for our next episode.